thanks so much for having me here. And I would like to say also a warm welcome back to you all to your, as I understand it, your absolutely final lecture of this program that you've been on to for a while. And we're here together on Zoom. Last year it wasn't Zoom, it was in real life. We're just adapting to what's happening in the world. We're adaptive creatures, right? And we need to be, because it's a VUCA world out there. So before I start talking about the topic, I'll just like to introduce myself shortly. Just a quick bio. I've been in business for about 25 years, 15 years on leadership teams. I've been in companies such as Unilever, Hilti, Thule Group, and a few others. I've worked extensively over the past 7 years or so with different types of companies in renewal situations, in fast growth or actually in rapid decline, to try to revitalize their businesses with focus on strategy, with focus on innovation, and with focus on renewal. And a lot of this comes back to the environment that the companies are in and adapting to that environment in a good way. So apart from that, my big mission in life right now is to guide leaders and organizations beyond business as usual. I blog, I write, and I speak. Please visit the blog if you're interested, elisabetlagerstedt.com. I've been writing there since 2010, starting with the digital revolution, trying to figure out what was going on in the environment. I've written for INSEAD Knowledge. I've written a book called Navigate into the Future, only in Swedish though, so for you who are interested, Navigera in I framtiden. I've got this flair for focusing on learning, continuous learning and development of myself, but also of my teams. I've been to a number of different executive education programs across the world, from Harvard to IMD to Oxford to INSEAD, even Singularity University. And I also teach. That would be in my spare time. I think it's really, really interesting and valuable to have these discussions with both young master program students in the entrepreneurship and innovation program, where I've been active since 2011 at Lund University, but also at IMD, where I'm an executive program coach. And then since last year, a guest lecturer here at your program. So that was short about me. We have about 2 hours, and I know already that I will need to keep you another 15 minutes or so just to wrap this up in a good way. I found this quote in Harvard Business Review a few years back. It's from an article that talks about the biology of corporate survival in a world that is changing rapidly, and why so many companies still do what they've always done instead of actually adopting to the situation. Personally, I found that interesting enough to go out and collect in a structured manner information about what is going on in the world around us. Why do companies seem to have difficulties coping? And what can we as leaders do to navigate that and navigate our organizations into the future and leading in this VUCA world? I found a lot of really, really interesting things. First of all, this may seem very simple, but it's just, something to think about. There is nothing like a straight line into the future. Rather, it looks like this. It's an adventure trail filled with the unexpected. Rain, snow, gravel, and things that we don't expect at all. And this now leads us to the VUCA concept. This is a concept or an acronym that was introduced by the US military following the 9/11 attack. It was then popularized in business after a book in 2009 by Bob Johansen. And it says the following: VUCA, the V stands for volatile. Our environment is in rapid change, and it's unpredictable in its nature and in its extent. It's also uncertain, the U in VUCA, right? The present is unclear and the future is uncertain. And then coming to the C, it's complex. Many different interconnected factors come into play. It has the potential to cause chaos and confusion. And then finally, you have the A, ambiguous. There is a lack of clarity or awareness about the situation. And this situation that we're actually in can lead to an overwhelm of individuals, of leaders, and organizations. It can create negative stress and fear. It can make people anxious. It can paralyze decision-making, jeopardize long-term projects. It can even stall careers. This is quite an interesting thing to know, is that our brains are wired to react to this uncertainty with fear. You could call it the caveman response if you want. There has been some research done at Caltech with brain imagery that shows that the less information that you have, the more irrational and erratic the decisions become. And in this VUCA world, what we actually lack, well, we do have a ton of information, but it's really, really hard to understand and to grasp. So it leads to a feeling of little information, making us more prone to take irrational and erratic decisions. And as this uncertainty actually increases, the brain shifts control from the prefrontal cortex to the limbic system, where emotions like anxiety and fear are generated. So that's pretty much how it comes into play. There is a really interesting article in the World Economic Forum where they actually talked about this already in 2015. So I've entered a link where you can check that out later. What trends, forces, and uncertainties do you see currently gaining momentum in the world, short-term and long-term? So please take the 20 minutes to discuss. Please think about, is a VUCA world only a threat, or does it also pose an opportunity? Now, so what I want to do quickly, I'm going to go over a couple of slides talking about the forces at play. I am actually not going to talk much about the COVID-19 because there is so much written about this in the press right now, and it changes from day to day, depending on who is discussing it and what perspective you take and what is going on. So I'm trying to leave that aside, but I will touch it briefly in a couple of minutes. So the first thing I come to think about when I think about the forces at play are the long-term megatrends that some of you mentioned. They are actually shaping the world as we know it, and they have been so for a decade or more actually already. We're talking about the digitalization, the rapid technological development, population growth, aging population, urbanization, changes in customer behavior, power balance moving from west to east. We're talking about migration, people moving from south to north. And we're talking about, of course, climate change and increased focus on sustainability. There are more. Some even mention a VUCA world as being a megatrend. If I say so, there is not one definition of what is a megatrend, and some even call it different things. But, you know, just to give you a hint, forces at play. Now, one thing I want to point out that you actually probably meet in your everyday work is this, that the speed of acceleration has increased. And this is, of course, part of the technological development, the increasing pace there. And this shows the increased pace from 1900 to 2005, I believe, the time of my grandmother when she was alive. Of course, when she was born, there was nothing more or less in the households. This shows the penetration of households from 0 to 100% in the US, because there is nothing like this for Sweden. So we'll have to do with the US. And you can see that things like electricity, refrigerator, clothing washer, and things like that took quite a long time to actually establish in society. What we're seeing now is an increased pace where new innovation build on innovation at a faster and faster pace because the infrastructure is there. So it's increasing the pace. And what you see as a consequence of this is also new business models popping out, starting to reshape our economy, enabled by the digitalization to a large extent. Some of them, of course, now also challenged by COVID-19, thinking about, for instance, Airbnb, right? And one thing you can do, if you want to find out what the future will look like, you can actually take this tip from William Gibson. He is a, believe it or not, science fiction author, American-Canadian, who said the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. This is actually a great quote, because what this means is that this is a great opportunity to learn from other parts of the world who have come a little further, from other industries, from other geographic areas, who have come a little further, who are in the forefront. For instance, looking at the that IMD gives out every year about digitalization. They've come up with a digital vortex where they talk about media and entertainment. They talk about tech products and services and retail as being in the forefront of digitalization and that specific megatrend. So looking into those industries and trying to figure out what's going on there is a great way to learn about where digitalization is going, right? That's what it wants. So the challenge at hand here, the way I see it, is that with everything that has been written about megatrends, innovation and business models, we have a few major uncertainties, and this is one of them. We do not know the consequences of our actions, actually. That is how we have changed the world and shaped the globe since the beginning of the industrialization. And we're actually talking about the age of the Anthropocene, as humans are now the major force of change on the earth. This is a bit of a challenge. The other uncertainty is this. Since the 1950s, we don't really know what this means and if and when it will end. We're seeing a great acceleration. We're seeing population increase, real GDP increase. We're seeing everything from carbon dioxide to ocean acidification growing exponentially. This is research done by a research team presented at futureearth.org in 2015, where they've put together a lot of information from indicators of this explosive exponential change or growth across a number of indicators on the globe. And normally nothing is expected to grow exponentially over time, ongoingly. So something will obviously stop this at some point. Question is what? And then we come to this, long-term global risks. We talked about COVID-19 as one of those things that actually really impacts us right now. The thing is, there are so many other things that are waiting around the corner, global risks that we know are out there, but we don't really know how severe they are. As you see here, the green dots are environmental risks. Looking at where we're at right now, the most critical risks are linked to climate change and environment, not to infectious diseases, but still it's a infectious disease or a virus hit us and are giving us a very hard time right. And they have been through history. We should have known that it would be coming again, and we did, but we just didn't prepare for it. How do we prepare to make sure that we can handle this footprint that we have put on the globe, going back to this, thinking about climate change and the destruction of environment as we've been going about it? You can hear I have my point of view on this. You could talk about COVID-19 as a black swan. I would say it's not, though, because it was expected that another pandemic would hit. What we're talking about here is a long history, a number of black swan events has happened. That is, we cannot predict the future. We can have conversations about it. We can try to identify the trends unfolding and understand how they will grow into the future. But it's really, really, really hard to predict these black swan events. One could actually be said to be Brexit. For me, that's a black swan event. Another one would actually, or could be, what happened in the White House when Trump was actually elected. Something we didn't really see coming. Combining them with this global risk landscape makes things and times uncertain. There are people saying that COVID-19 is a black swan. There are also people saying that it is not, because it could have been expected. Bill Gates talked about a potential pandemic 5 years ago. There was a TEDx discussion about that, and he is now sorry that he didn't push it further. And it's not black or white, I would say, this black swan theory. It's a theory, nothing else. And it's a way of illuminating the forces at play. Some things here we just don't expect. And from that perspective, I would give you, well, what's going on here? We're talking about climate change, for instance. This is just my personal reflection. Well, that is not a black swan because it's taking so long for it to unfold. So we're not seeing that as a black swan event. However, a pandemic is coming really abruptly. So that's probably why we see it as very unexpected, making things very uncertain quickly. I would say, though, that and the environmental change that is upon us is supposed to be more severe than the COVID-19 crisis. That's just to think about. I think that is, and COVID-19 from that perspective is actually a lot about the speed. It happened very quickly and unraveled at an extreme pace. All right, so welcome back to the second part. And I would like to, before we jump into what this all means to the role of the leader, I would like to just hear around the group, you know, with all of these uncertainties messing with our brains, do you believe it's a world full of threats, or are there also opportunities? I think we have a limited cognitive ability, which actually means we can't handle the information flow. It's unsorted, and as long as it's unsorted without, you know, some sort of a structure, it's difficult to draw any conclusions. So I think you're right from that perspective, for sure. All right, so thanks so much, guys. Interesting to hear your reflections on that. What we're going to do now is just think a little bit about the role of the leader in this VUCA world. And I just pulled down a screenshot from deposit photos, searching for leadership, just wanting to see in general what types of words are associated with leadership, being a leader. What I would like for you to do is thinking about the circumstances and the environment that we're in, being a VUCA world. What is the role of a leader there? Is it the same as it always has been, or are there new things emerging? So what is the role of a leader? You can see your organizations and the world in different pace layers. Some layers move really, really, really quickly. That is fashion, fast fashion, for instance, while some layers, infrastructure, investments we made, you know, with 30-year payoffs, they move very slowly. And in different situations, you may be called to take really rapid decisions. But in some situations, when it comes to very long-term decision making, you may want to slow down. So just because we're living in a VUCA world doesn't mean that everything has to move very rapidly. Just a bit of thinking. Now, of course, very humbly, I have to say, because we're in difficult times, and even if it wasn't difficult times, how to lead in a VUCA world is not just something you put together and, you know, get it out there. It takes some consideration. And what I've tried to do here is humbly share some of my findings and experiences, partly from the last crisis, but also from all the research I've done and the experience I have. And also I've been borrowing from other thinkers and leaders. I'm going to try to summarize what we just talked about. One of the first things I see as being very important is this. If you don't listen, if you're not proactive and really focus on reacting in time, and as I said, time is relative depending on what pace layer you're talking about, you will not survive in a VUCA world, and you will definitely not thrive, even though you might survive. But listening, being proactive, and trying to see around corners, as Rita McGrath, one of the world's most well-known and quoted innovation and strategy professors right now is saying, I think is absolute key. Moving on with this, some of you mentioned already working with scenarios, because nothing is actually completely clear. We don't know how the future is going to unfold. But what we do know is a number of different factors, a number of megatrends, and we can try to put them together to come up with different scenarios on how we think that the environment might unfold. And then we can start having discussions internally about what is the most probable, or the most probable different scenarios that we think could emerge, and what is our role in that future. How could we survive and thrive in a world like that? That's the kind of discussions a top team needs to have, and not only a top team, but actually parts of the organization too. And then it's all about, from my perspective, to be really clear about your ambition and direction. I think To me, this is about that you're not a passive bystander to a world that is happening. You're actually co-creating it. So you could either see yourself as a victim, or you could see yourself as a co-creator of the future. And you can use your teams to help co-create. But you need to be clear in which direction you're going, both for the company, but also for the team, right? One more thing here, McKinsey has also shown that it pays off to have a long-term view. Those companies actually perform better than those that are stuck in the short term. Then you come to this one, and I think this is actually quite important because, as we talked about before, a VUCA world creates uncertainty. And if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what your purpose is, everything becomes kind of meaningless, a bit bland. You're wondering why the heck you're doing all of this, right? So one of the most important things, I believe personally, for you as a leader going forward in a VUCA world is to provide context, meaning, and purpose to your teams. Ideally, you have a company with a higher purpose, like IKEA, for instance. If you don't, you need to provide purpose, context, and meaning to your team so that they feel meaningful and that their work has a meaning and is worthwhile. One of the things I believe for myself has been helpful is to think about and work in 3 horizons. It doesn't have to be 3, it can be more than 3, it can be 2, but thinking about here and now, thinking about 2 to 5 years, thinking about beyond that. This all depends a bit on what pace your industry is in, how long your innovation cycles are. For instance, in the medical field, I would probably say that 5 years from now is not far away enough. It needs to be further away. But, try to think about how you can juggle with all of these different perspectives, because this is what you need to handle. Here and now, how do we handle the crisis? At the same time, what comes afterwards, and how and who do we want to be in the future to plug into this world unfolding in a nice way? And this all, of course, is about ensuring long-term relevance. You need to survive to be able to be in the long term. But in the long term, if you're not clear on what your company brings to the world, how it makes a difference, if you're relevant, how you add value, and how you can remain relevant and continue to add value, you have a problem. Then you're stuck in the short-term cycle, which doesn't bring good results, actually. So I'm really urging you to try to see those 3 horizons and see if you can structure your work somehow in those 3 to be able to think not only short term, but also mid-term and long term. To me, one of the most powerful things is to involve your team and co-create the future that you want together. It is not motivational to push something down from the top and just say this is how it's supposed to be. Some things need to be, but there is a lot of energy unleashed in the organization if you involve people. And also another factor, when you involve people, you actually help reducing stress. And thinking about what we talked about before, this uncertainty creates stress and fear. When you get involved, you increase your feeling of control, and that actually, per definition, reduces stress. So you become more productive, more focused on co-creating and creating rather than wasting your energy on things you can't really impact. So it's a positive force. Co-create with your team. This is also evident, crisis will appear. This is not the COVID-19, it's not the last one. No matter what we're talking about, we have the climate crisis around the corner. It's actually already here, but it's unfolding so much slower. We need to be agile, we need to adapt, but at the same time, keep that eye on the horizon. How to lead in a VUCA world. I actually thought this was quite interesting. So the first one is counter volatility with a clear vision, right? On where you want to go long term. Meet uncertainty with insight and understanding. How important it is to have some sort of a common ground and understanding of what's going on, and how much more efficient and aligned we become when that happens. And then react to complexity by creating clarity. Having the insight and understanding helps us get clarity. And when we see, things automatically feel less complex. finally, fight ambiguity with agility. And we talked about that as well. That is, being flexible and adaptable help us fight that ambiguity that is all around us. To me, that's quite a nice one. So now I have some words for you. This is your final lecture in this program. You have immersed yourself in so much new knowledge. So sometimes it's hard to remember yourself. And I know you're probably doing this on top of what you're already doing, even though it's a bit of a break right now in everything that's going on. But in all of this, you need to remember yourself, because you are your most important and precious tool. If you don't work, you will not be able to lead your team, and you will not be able to contribute to your organization. So it all comes back to tending to yourself. And what do I mean with this? Remember the brain we talked about before, where uncertainty makes you more irrational, creates irrational decision, where uncertainty creates fear, where uncertainty activates that limbic system to go in overdrive, meaning fear and anxiety is what, dominates your life, and you can't get those thoughts out of your thinking, and your head starts spinning. I've been there for sure. This is when you come down to what some call stress management. And some of the very useful tools here is, of course, exercise, spend time in nature, sleep, connect socially, eat well, make lists, prioritize, reduce caffeine. But one thing I can deeply, deeply recommend that I've been practicing myself over the past 5 years is meditation and deep breaths, really, really, and trying to find that peaceful place within yourself, because with that comes clarity and the end of the monkey mind. So that was the first one. The second one I'm thinking of is, if not already, you probably will be pushed out of your comfort zone, from that safe and in control feeling with low risk and low rewards into that fear zone where it actually affects your self-confidence, probably others' opinions of you too. Daring to go beyond that fear zone, daring to learn, daring to grow, find your purpose, move out there in the world and solve problems bigger than yourself. That's what I encourage you to do. So don't sit around and just wait for this. I'm thinking about the COVID specifically. Take care of that time, cherish it, and use it to learn and to grow. With that said, my friends, I have 2 quotes to send you off with. The first one is, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new. The second one is, we've watched the COVID-19 situation unfold at incredible speed. The climate crisis is playing out on a much slower time frame. We know roughly what to expect and when to expect it, and we should be preparing with the same level of urgency.